Good evening, Juan and Fernando.
Good night, teacher. How are you?
Fine. How are you doing?
Good, good. Thank you very much.
Great. We will start as soon as 3 more students join us. Good evening, Carolina. Good evening, Lisette.
Good evening, teacher.
Hello, Alexander.
Hi, teacher. How are you doing?
Good.
All right, that's good.
Okay, so we can start. On the screen, you see a picture that appears in the reading that you had last week. Last week you had 2 readings. One was an article about the development of the hearing system, and the other reading was a research article about the interference of L1 when learning a second language or a foreign language, but not in terms of in terms of or based on neuroscience and data collected through neuroscience procedures. So I want to start by asking you what you remember about this picture, this photo that you see on the screen. What you remember that the article discusses about newborns versus children development of the hearing system.
Teacher, I'm sorry. Can you please repeat the question?
Yes, you see on the screen the picture of that represents some findings about the development of the hearing system in newborns and in children. So I would like you to, any of you, tell me what you remember about that reading. I'm going to read.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, Fernando.
What I remember is that the baby, when is 3 months old, 3 months of gestation in the mother's womb, he's able to identify the mother's voice. So through the development of the baby, he starts relating the sound of the voice of his mom or her mom. So I could say that the brain starts to develop at a short age even if people say that when a woman is 3 months of pregnancy, the baby is not alive, is not true because what as we could see in the reading, it says that the brain of the baby starts to develop at that age. They start to recognize the mother's voice and some other sounds, but especially the mother's voice. And through the development of the baby in the womb, they start to identify different sounds. And when they are born, the study said that children from France or Germany or German, I'm sorry, they know how to the tone of voice they identify because of the way the baby cries. So French babies stretch. I'm sorry, make longer the crying, while the German babies stretch the sound of the cry. It's the same with American babies. They since they when they talk, they short the vowels. The babies learn how to do that, but when they cry.
Good. So, as you mentioned, the reading discusses the fact that babies 3 months before they are born, they already have developed their ears, and so they are able to recognize, as you mentioned, mother's voice. And from that time, they get to they get to know the sound of the language that they hear. That's why, as you mentioned, the article presents that there are some differences between French and German sound. And so babies, when they cry, they have that sound. I mean, French babies have a tone of crying that raises up at the end, while German babies have a tone of crying that raises up at the beginning. So that's one part, very good. I'm going to read Juan David's comment. He wrote, at the beginning, the mother's voice reaches the baby's ears inside the womb, then other loud sounds or voices as well. This first step is to learn the melody of the language. Later, during the next few months and years after birth, other features of language are added, like the meaning of words and the formation of full sentences. The development of the hearing system and the development of the brain language network provide crucial preconditions for, give me a second, crucial preconditions for infants to be able to develop and improve their language abilities. Although infants already have an important groundwork for language acquisition, more advanced language learning becomes possible as the brain continues to develop during childhood. The reading mentions that for both newborn infants and children going to school, the network of brain connections between the language regions is generally established. Okay, so here Juan mentions that there are some regions that are already developed, which are the ones that we see on the picture in color red and in color pink. So those are two regions
The
that
regions, yes,
are
on the left side of the brain.
exactly. Carlos, could you please tell us more about that and the connections?
Okay, teacher. First of all, I want to say something. Something that I want to complete something of the first reading. Okay, is that the all it has to do with the pattern of melody. Yes, each language has a different pattern of melody. So that's the reason that the baby is able to to get, yes, the different languages. Yes, it's because of the melody. Yes, so babies can listen to the people talking and learn the melody. So how their mother tongue and how it's spoken from that moment until the baby is a year old. The baby through sounds following this melody, this pattern of melody, teacher. Yeah.
Right?
And um, let me see
Well,
about
and
this about this pattern of on the left side of the brain. Okay.
right,
Okay, so these are connected by nerves, yes, and this these are called, yes, let me think, nerve fibers, yes, and these nerve fibers are very important, yes, because if they don't develop in a correct way, so the children will be able to reach the ability to start to learn so the language in a correct way, yeah, and it is very important because we get to a point of our age, yes, so when we get old that uh, this transmission, yes, when this ability, yes, stops, yeah, so that's the reason that we had to take advantage when we are when we teach children, yes, so they have the ability to how can I say this? So it's
To learn.
a powerful tool that we can introduce all this language because the information, yes, goes through these nerve fibers, yes, can reach us what we want, can reach what we want in the children. Yeah. So this connection are called network. Yes, that's what I understood in the reading.
Yes, that's right. Everything that you mentioned. And both the brains that we have here are from a newborn and from a 7-year-old children. Uh, well, from a 7-year-old child. And as you mentioned, there are some fibers and network connections between the two parts of the brain that are already formed when children are born. So,
Yes, teacher. There was a part in the reading that said that these connections for a network, yeah, that provides the hardware for the language in the brain. Yes, and this is the most important part of this point. Yes, the hardware that we can form in this brain to learn the language. Yes, for the kid to learn the language.
good. Yeah, so we are born with those parts of the brain developed, that those parts are the ones that we use in order to communicate and learn the language. As Juan David mentioned, is through experience and learning that the connections get that we get more connections between both parts so that we learn more things about the language and about communication. But we are born with the with those parts of the brain that are necessary for a person to learn a language, any language.
Yeah, teacher. And also there is another part of the reading that get me astonished because they said that even the babies when they are born, yeah, we can say that they can speak a different language from babies that are born in other countries because there was a study that measured the melody, the frequency of this melody, and they can notice that it was different, yes, in the frequency, in the tone, in many different things. So we can say that the child is born speaking our so the mother language.
Well, yeah, the child when the child is born, they have already acquired the sound of the language that the
Yeah.
mother speaks, right? And we know that after the first year or after the first 2 years, um, people are able to speak.
Yes,
So
teacher.
they need the experience of having people talking to them, the experience of learning the meaning of the objects that are around them, so they can, after 1 year or two, they can actually start talking. Good.
Okay, teacher.
Anybody else wants to mention something about this picture or that reading? Okay, what about the second reading? The second reading was a research about the influence of the first language when learning a foreign language or a second language. So that research presents some um, evidence on the parts of the brain that take part on the process of learning both languages and how they work when we are learning one language after the other. Do you guys remember that?
Sorry, teacher, can you repeat the question again?
Yes, the second reading is about the influence of the first language when learning a second language and the parts of the brain that take part on learning and how they work and how how those parts of the brain work and the processes that take place when the person has already learned the first language, the mother tongue, and is trying to learn a second language or a foreign language.
Yes, about
Teacher,
that, I could understand that it all depends on the language family, like your mother tongue is coming from. It's mm, like if you're learning maybe if a Colombian speaker would probably have like less difficulties learning Italian or Spanish because they all belong like almost like to Romance languages, so they are
Right.
very similar. So that would be like easier for us to learn like languages that are alike. That's what I could understand about that. Like,
Yes, that's one part, right? So if both languages are similar, that will be easier for the brain to learn the second language or the foreign language. Good. Somebody else?
teacher me,
There's another part.
teacher,
Sorry.
Okay, Juanita? No? Who was speaking?
teacher me, Jaime.
Jaime?
Please.
Yes, teacher.
Okay, Jaime and then Liz, please.
Teacher, the first part when a child is learning a second language, um, he has in his brain or in the brain the representation of that object. For example, how the sample show it. He has in her brain in his brain the representation of the apple. Uh, he know what is the color of the apple, and he know what is the shade of the apple, and for he learn in his second language, he he only add the word apple to his brain, because he know the shape and the color and another representations in his brain.
Very good. So what you just mentioned is related to semantics, which is the process that we carry out in order to make relationships between the object and the word. So the reading, the article that you read mentions that when the person already has already learned the first language, the mother tongue, the person has already been through the process of associating the word with the object and all the characteristics. So by the time that they learn the second language or the foreign language, they need just to memorize the word because they have already done the other process that you mentioned. Very good, Jaime. Liz, you said?
Yeah, I was going to talk about the same thing. So there is a that the mother tongue is very important because like it influences in the learning of the second language a lot. Like I see it on my students right now, the kids that have not consolidated their mother tongue, they're having difficulties writing in English. So they most like we're for strengthening, like we're giving it priority to L1 because they're never going to learn to write in English if they have not developed or consolidated their code in Spanish. So the influence is very big that that the L1 has in learning a second language.
Okay. Let's say that a person can learn both languages at the same time. That happens with children. They can learn to talk, and they listen to both languages when they are babies. Probably they are gonna take more time to decide the language that they want to talk, although they might understand both. But the writing process, as you mentioned, is kind of different.
Yes, and besides,
Exactly.
writing in English is kind of tricky for kids because they associate like English. The writing process is like in Spanish. The words are written the way they sound. They associate that, and it was mentioned in the reading what just Liz no
Lisette.
who talked. Yeah, Lisette just has said, but it happens in the schools because the schools focus on writing more on speaking more on the natural way, but it's because of discipline terms, I would say. And but at home it's more natural, and a kid could study English and Spanish like more naturally, and it would be better. But
Yeah, I mean, that should be the process to try to help them to learn in a more natural way. Um, and well, what the reading discussed was how, if the person has already learned the first language, the mother tongue, how that affects the or influences the learning of the second one. And so, as Lisette mentioned, if the child has already learned how to write in Spanish, it's going to be easier for the child to learn how to write in the foreign or second language. But speaking is a different process. So for speaking, the child can learn both languages at the same time and can use them. And you have seen that. You have seen those cases.
yeah, when kids know how to speak English like more than others here in Latin America, it's easier. The reading, okay, reading is easier than writing. When they know how to pronounce things correctly, they can identify easier or faster how to read properly, how to pronounce words properly. But the writing is more difficult for kids to remember how to write words properly because of the double letters like P in apple, and sometimes they have three vowels together like in beautiful. So that's really tricky for kids.
Right. Okay. Somebody else
Teacher.
want to mention? Fernando? Fernando?
Yes. Talking about the two languages, I think that sometimes it could be confusing for kids to learn both languages at the same time. I mean, it's possible because their brain allows them to do it, but once they get to the writing part or the speaking part, they can get mistakes and they can get confused, right?
Right.
So I would say that it is better to start working on one language and then working in the other one.
I would say that the best is the one person just focuses on one language, and other people, for example, this is what I do with my kids. I just talk to them in English,
Yes.
and I do
Yes.
homework in English, so they don't have problem. They don't get confused. My wife and other people communicate with them in Spanish, and I'm in charge of English, so they don't get confused. And if they have problems with grammar or something, I correct them, and it's okay. This experiment is great. The experiment I have performed with my kids, it's great. Yeah, this is just an experiment.
Okay,
Mhm.
teacher, I would like to say something. Okay, there
Okay.
is a part of the reading that says that it's better to learn the, for example, L1 and L2 at the same time because, for example, when you learn grammatically, um, for example, just a language, you have to, for example, had to make two efforts, a double effort, yes, because you had to think first in your mother language, and then you had to, for example, if you think about an apple, you for example if you see an apple you can how can I say you can relate it with the word that is in your mother language. But if you want to say, for example, you see that apple and you are learning, for example, that meaning in the new language, so you have to relate it with your mother language, and then your brain has to relate it with the shape of the object that we are talking about. So the reason that it says in the reading that it's better to learn two languages at the same time is that you don't have to make that relation in your brain. Yes, it's just because you just in your brain you just see the shape of the object. So you don't need for example, to change yes into one language to another, from one language to another.
Yeah, so
Teacher
that's really good.
Diana.
Diana?
Yeah, just following my classmates' comments. Yeah, I totally agree with what Fernando says, with what Carlos says, what Liz was mentioning. But there is something very interesting. Many modern teaching methods right now, they like to isolate the L1 teaching and the L2 teaching. For example, some of my classmates were saying that they prefer to speak English all the time in their classes with their students without mentioning Spanish at all. But maybe we are forgetting a fact, an important fact. Okay, we are trying to isolate the first language, the mother tongue, because we want the structure to be engraved in our brains, the brain of our students. But there is something really interesting is that the present the L1 is always present in the students. So even if they don't hear the mother tongue, when they are learning a language, they will also refer back to their mother tongue. That structure is already engraved in your brain. I was just trying to find a quote for the reading, but I just lost it. Oh yeah, okay. It says that the L1 it will be always present in the L2 learner's mind, whether the teacher wants it or not. They will always be there, and the L2 knowledge that is being created in their mind is connected in all sort of ways with their L1 knowledge. So students will always refer back to their L1, to their mother tongue, even if they are just kind of absorbed in the new language new vocabulary. They will always refer back to their mother tongue.
Yes, I
Okay,
agree with Diana. Yeah.
right. Carolina?
Teacher, I want to say something. Yes, I don't know. I feel like in my students and actually in my case, when I was learning like English, I consider that my mother tongue is like a vase, yeah, it's like something from we can start because of what just Jaime said. We have like an amount of vocabulary and structures and rules in our heads, and that is the way that like when we are learning our second language, we connect like some of the similar characteristics that we have in our mother tongue and in the new language that we are learning. So I know, I don't know, I consider like it's like a process. Like we learn the second language, but we are still learning about our own language. So I think that it has to be like a connected and very related process. And
Yes.
that's what I feel when I am teaching to my students, because I try to do mimics. I draw in my board, in my blackboard. I do a lot of things, and at the end sometimes it's very just to like maybe said the word in Spanish, and they I don't know, they get like the word and the meaning of obviously like yeah, at the moment. So sometimes I feel like this is very very connected, because we have to yeah, we have to use our mother tongue while we are learning the the target language.
Okay, Carolina, the reading mentioned the parts of the brain that are in charge of learning a language,
Yeah,
and
and they are the same.
mentions the reason why it is easier for a person to learn a second or foreign language when they already know their mother tongue. Do you
Yes.
remember the reason?
Hmm. Let me see. That was in the first question of the task. Let me see because I right now I don't remember.
Okay, anybody remembers that? What's the reason why the parts, the neuroscientists have studied the parts of the brain that are in charge of talking and learning languages? Why is it easier for the brain to learn a second or foreign language uh, after talking or knowing the first language, the mother tongue?
Teacher, I could answer that. Let me give me just 1 second. Um, it says that neuroscience studies have brought to light important discoveries about preconditions and the development of language and speech intents. It says that they say that it is interesting to think that a baby has already taken the first steps even before birth. And they also say that babies are born knowing the sound and melody of their mother tongue, and they can already speak by following the melodic pattern.
Right? But what
It is
happens? What happens in the brain that makes it easier to learn the second language after?
okay. It says here that certain parts of the brain are responsible for understanding words and sentences and are mainly located in two regions in the left side of the brain and are connected by nerves. These brain regions and their connections form a network that provides the hardware for language in the brain. And without this brain network, we would not be able to talk or to understand what's been said.
Okay, right. So you were talking about the two parts of the brain and the network. So the reason
Yes.
is because we use the same parts of the brain and the same networks to learn the second language. So if we have already
Yes.
developed some connections when we learned the first language, we will use the same connections to learn the second one. Almost the same parts of
Yes.
the brain. So that's why.
Yeah, it
Teacher Diana.
happens.
Yes. Actually, it says that these connections allow the network nodes to exchange information and the development of the hearing system.
And this is what people do to learn in order to learn like a third language, a fourth language. Yeah, that is very common on YouTube, on the internet,
All
and
right.
it makes sense.
Yeah, that makes.
Just to mention something as a complement to what Fernando was saying, talking related to the hearing system. It's really interesting because the sounds that the baby listens when it's very small, that's what are going to be essential for the baby to learn a language. For example, a monolingual brain, a baby that just is exposed to only one language, for example, learning Spanish, only learning Spanish, the baby. So this baby's brain becomes tuned to the sounds of only Spanish, of one language. But when the bilingual brain becomes tuned to the sounds of the two languages, so the baby can learn two languages at the same time, or even three languages. And this happens during the first 11 months of age. So this activity in the brain, the hearing system in the baby's brain, reflects the language of the languages that the baby has been exposed to. So the hearing system in the baby is priority, it's fundamental.
Yes.
Sí, saber hacer, hijo.
He's speaking. I can't hear.
There is a lot of interruptions. I can hear like five people talking at the same time.
Yes.
Okay, so what Diana added to the information that we discussed was that that process takes place during the first 11 months, so that children can learn the tunes of two or more languages during those 11 first months of life. It doesn't mean that, as we have also discussed in previous encounters, it doesn't mean that adolescents or adults cannot learn. They can, but
More
since
different.
yes, we have the interference of the first language there, right? So let's look at this cartoon.
Sorry, teacher, what was the question? I couldn't hear well what you were
We have
saying.
interference of the second language, of the mother tongue, sorry, when learning a second or foreign language. So I ask you to read the cartoon, and if any of you remember the conclusions of that article about phonetics and grammar, please mention that.
Teacher, I think that's the picture describe what happens to a kid when he's trying to learn how to pronounce a word. For example, sometimes they misspell a word, or they don't know how to pronounce the word, and that also affects the way the brain connects the word, and it affects how they pronounce the word.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Like,
do you remember that reading mentioned the reason why the person is not able to produce the same sounds? What happens in the brain, or what is the problem there?
it's interesting that, for example, for when I learned English with international students in a foreign country, and it was really interesting because for Japanese students and Korean students, for them it was nearly impossible to pronounce some words in English, and for us Latin Spanish-speaking students, we had hard time pronouncing words like shift and things like that. So these pronunciation issues are related to your mother tongue. For some languages, it's difficult to pronounce some words, and for other students, like Latin American speaking students, it's difficult to pronounce some words, which is, I think, what the cartoon reflects. It's
To
something to do with the brain. Sorry.
what Diana is saying, I would say that according to the reading, it says that if I don't remember, please correct me. It says that it has something to do with the nerves, right? With the connection between the network and the brain. Am I correct?
No,
No,
somebody
teacher,
first?
is
Jaime?
the reading is about the maybe the error is not in the sound itself, rather the way
It is pronounced.
in the
Produce.
produce the sound.
Exactly. So we don't have problems to identify different sounds. We can hear that they have different sounds, but
Teacher
we cannot
is
produce it.
perception, yes?
Sorry?
So
Yeah,
the
teacher.
sorry, teacher, the correct word for this is perception, yes, because in the reading says they have two different groups that they made a study, so they can see that the perception of these two groups were very different. It was depending on the region that they were placed, yeah. Um, and because their ability of acoustic their acoustic ability were the same, but their perception about the phonetic sounds uh, and yes, the phonetic sounds were different. So that was the reason that they some people get more difficult to learn a language. Yeah.
Teacher,
No, but it's
teacher,
the
they
opposite, Carlos. We can perceive the sounds. We can.
Yeah.
Carolina?
yeah, in the reading they talk about an investigation that they did in between Catalan and Spanish, and in that part of the reading it's where they mention that the difference is in the acoustic abilities. I don't know how to pronounce that, but it is actually in the auditory speech skills. That was what Jaime just said. So they compare like those two abilities, and
Yeah.
that is the point that they are trying to like explain.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Teacher,
So we
I
can,
think,
yes.
yeah, I think that it has to do a lot with fossilization. And if a person has been saying the same mistake over and over, and and this person has never been corrected, then this person will be like pronouncing the words with the same mistake over and over and all the time because nobody has been correcting this person since
Mm-hmm.
the first time this person has been studying English.
Yeah, but regarding the system that fails in that process is the speech one. Is not we identify the sounds. We actually perceive that a native person is producing different sounds, but by the time we are trying to produce them, we have difficulties. So how can we correct that with a lot of practice? By for example, in YouTube, we can find different tutorials about exercises that we can do in order to produce those different sounds.
Oh, yeah.
So as everything is about practice. So if we want to improve our writing, we need to practice that. If we want to improve our pronunciation, so we need to practice how to pronounce those sounds that are different.
Teacher, and something that calls my attention is those kids in the schools that don't like English, or even they know but they don't want to use it. Uh, and talking about what Carolina has mentioned about using Spanish, like sometimes in when kids don't understand, so those kind of students take advantage of this in order to use Spanish because the characteristic of those students are they don't want to use English and they love to use the Spanish. That's why, and I suppose that's why they don't learn so much because they don't want to make a lot of effort.
Yes, those are the students that understand what you tell them or can read information. Even they can write, but they are not good at speaking. And it can be because they just don't want to try it out or they feel ashamed to make mistakes in front of others or they just don't want to use the language in another way. What are the conclusions of the article regarding grammar and the interference of L1 when learning L2?
Yeah, when there are similarities, that it's easier for students or for kids to acquire the grammar. When there are more differences, there are gonna be more interference. Or yeah,
Yes, right.
and there are many examples there, like German,
Yes.
Netherlands.
Yes.
Gosh.
Yeah, and it makes sense when grammar is so different. Kids are gonna have more difficulties to produce correctly.
And there is something quite funny there because if you notice in Spanish we use different grammar structures, but we have no idea that we are using them. And in English, for example, for instance, in English you have to be careful the way you talk because they use a lot, and they are also they notice how you use the grammar structures.
But what do you think? Is it better for learning English, learning grammar, or just just learning the language? What would be
No, I
better?
think that it is important to learn the grammar. I mean, that's the basic. I mean, if you want to start talking English, it is important for you to understand the grammar first.
Yeah,
Without
but
gra-
if you
without
want a
grammar,
but if you want a person to learn a lot of English, like speaking fluently, what would be better? Just not studying grammar or studying grammar?
study grammar.
What do you guys think? Is it
Actually, I
better
think that when you study grammar, that will help you to learning process, because grammar helps people to understand better, like how do you say, the words and the meaning of them. Also, mm, it helps you to understand the writing and
I
to get it better. And
I think
the dialect, like when you interact with other people and talk about different topics, grammar also helps in that. So I think it is very important to study grammar
okay.
in the
I
learning process.
we are talking the
I
same.
think excuse me. I think when teachers teach grammar is because of the problem is because of the time. Like teaching grammar, some students can learn or they can, I don't know how to say deducir.
That
Fair.
How do
Use.
infer?
Yes.
Yeah, some students can infer, can take the basis, and can infer and construct uh, structures, and they can go faster because if teachers don't use grammar, they need a lot of time and they need a lot of examples, like to make the language naturally. So I think the problem is about time.
I think it also depends on the age of the students, because
yeah.
like little kid will not get like the grammar rules. I think it's better to do it in a more natural way, as my partner said.
Well, the age is important, as you said. So if we are teaching
I
preschoolers, we are not going to teach them grammar. They are going to pay attention to that.
Yeah.
Grammar in a deductive way, like that you explain the grammar rule, so they are not going to pay attention. They are not going to
Exactly.
understand that if they are preschoolers.
I personally don't think that you have to teach grammar. Well, you do teach grammar, it's important, but I don't think the traditional way, like you isolate the grammar from the oral communication. For example, we are going to learn today the present perfect, but you don't teach the students to learn the topic into a daily life situation. So when students are in a real situation, in a real conversation, they are not able to produce the language that they just learned. So I think I tend to teach more grammar in a context. For example, we are going shopping today, something like that. So you give a student
Yeah,
some expressions, some phrases, and through the readings or through the dialogues, through the conversations, students are able to work by themselves some of the rules, and they will come back to the teacher and ask them, why do you mean? Why do you put the adjective first? Or why is the verb in past? So they have to work out in their own heads the rules. So I just think when you give all the when you teach grammar as an isolated topic, is a big mistake, because the students won't be able to put it into a real context. So grammar is important, but it's not the main thing.
Uh,
Yeah, I agree.
Sure.
I agree with Belisario too. Also, same things. Like, I mean, you know why? Because most native speakers, I mean, they don't care if you make grammar mistakes. I mean, they just want to communicate with you, and they just want to share like your thoughts, your communicate with you as a human being. They don't want to talk to you as an English student. So I think grammar makes the process of speaking slower because I mean, if you focus on grammar, you're gonna make the communication with native speakers a lot slower because you're gonna think about the verb, the subject, and adjectives and those things. I
So
think
in that sense,
grammar makes the process.
that's
It's important.
in that sense, you
I
also
think
agree with Diana
you
because
want to communicate effectively. So forget about the idea like perception. You have to learn how to be perfect.
Another important
Belisario.
another important aspect to take into account is the like if the English is taught in a bilingual school or not, because in bilingual schools most of the subjects are in English, so the people have to communicate in English as well. Like besides studying something, they need to communicate, they need to use the language, so it's easier, it's faster. I know a language school here that is bilingual, and some teachers are native speakers, are from the US, and kids learn English so fast. Okay, or most of them. So it's amazing. So this is the
Yeah.
easy to
I
see
know.
bilingual in
I would
school.
say that
We all want to talk
yeah,
at the same time today.
it's important. It's important to make the kids like or the kids or the people to have like a real life experience. Yes, introduce the grammar to them like into a real life experience. But I think that if you don't teach them business structure, everything happens to account when you create a sentence or when you are going to speak, they're going to make mistakes. Sadly, nowadays, rappers, when they rap, they say, you is mad with me. And sadly, that's the way the kids are learning English. If you notice, black people in the States, they make a lot of mistakes when they talk, and that's the reason why I think it's important for us as teachers to, yes, of course, introduce the grammar into a real life situation, but it is important for us to show them how to create a sentence in a real life.
I'm following from Fernando. I always think that when I was studying the readings about the influence of an L1 on the learning of grammar of an L2, I actually meditate on the mistakes that I make, as English is my second language. So it's really interesting that we all are Spanish speakers, we all make the same mistakes. And all our students, for example, sometimes when you want to talk about a woman, you say he. So I have to correct my students all the time. Or you're talking about man and you say she, or you say he played, and so we forget to put the s in the third person. Why? Because we don't have that structure in our brain as Spanish speakers. So that gives me the answer to the question. Does L1 influence on the learning of grammar of the L2? Of course, the answer is yes, because we all make the same mistakes, and the mistakes that we are making now as Spanish speakers are because we are thinking the way that our L1 is in growth in our brain. So definitely has a big influence, and we need to teach our students just to remember that English or French or German or any language that we are learning are completely different structures. So it does have a big influence, but we have to teach our students to think in a different way. We make the same
Yes,
mistakes as Spanish
No.
speakers.
I totally agree with you, Diana, but the problem is that the students don't listen to English naturally, like in a context. That's why they forget about, or they don't learn the S, how to use the S in third person, because this is really tricky for all the students who speak Spanish. It's really tricky. But I think if students listen to that and listen to the ad a lot, they won't have problems with that. But they need to have a lot of content with English and that, because my son doesn't have much problem with that, but he has been exposed to that language a lot. He watches just TV in that language. That is the
Yes,
feeling.
that's what I was going to
Can I
say.
Now,
say something?
very good. We are debating. Very good.
Juanita and Felix.
Yeah.
That was what I was going to say, because, for example, my child,
She's now 5.5 years old, but since she was a little baby, I tried to introduce her to English by letting her interact with videos and children songs. And when I'm in a movie plan with her, I try to get her to understand or to listen to the movie in English. So I think that that's important. The explosion. Oh, no, no, that's what that was not what I was going to say. Like to try to get the children to interact in different ways with the language. It's a little difficult when you're in a country that only speaks in Spanish. But with different things, little things, like for example, reading them a story in English, not only in Spanish, you get to know the children, but you get them to know the language. So when they are trying to learn it, it's a little bit more easy for them because it is familiar for them.
Okay, Felix?
Well, good evening. Well, I was working on a unit that is special for special teachers. I mean, we did that some students need a special style of learning. Some students have the ability to learn languages, but by using Spanish and English, it's impossible to forget that the kids have a pre-connective knowledge about the Spanish, and this helps students a lot because when I was working on this, I was working with our interpreter, and this interpreter is good because he works in USA, relating all the time, and I was once I asked him what happened. Is good to use Spanish and English? Well, he said to me, no, there is no problem about that. The problem is some kids that maybe do not have the correct way to learn English by using Spanish, but Spanish is a good tool to learn English. All depends of that. As Belisario said, some schools don't permit to use Spanish, yeah, and English at the same time. But the one way or another way, it is used at the same time when someone that do not speak English are learning this language.
Well, again,
It's
it's
good.
important to have in mind, as Lizeth mentioned, the
Yeah.
person's age. So in Juanita's experience with her baby, and in Belisario's experience with with his children, they experience a more natural process because they started to help their kids learn the language when they were little ones, when they were babies or they were children.
Yeah.
But if we think about the process that is carried out in an immersion school, it's kind of similar with preschoolers, but by the time they get to know more about grammar in Spanish too, so they also have lessons about how to write well, the structure of sentences, the meaning of an adjective, the meaning of a noun. So it is not that people don't need to learn some grammar. We need to, and we have to teach that. So, but depending on the student's age, we are going to approach that topic. If they are preschoolers, they are not going to understand. If they are primary school students, they will face some short sentences. But if they are high school students, they will need to get ready to write paragraphs and to connect ideas and to be more structured. So we do have to teach a grammar in a certain time, at a certain moment, and depending on the student's age.
Teacher, I was going to share with you that it also depends, or with you guys, that it also depends on the teacher. As you said, like in an immersion school, I mean, kids start learning English since they're in nursery. But I've seen from my experience that there are teachers that do like follow the rules and talk to them all the time, the rules of the school, I mean, and talk to them all the time in English. But there are some teachers that do not follow these rules. So when I receive them in second grade, I'm a second grade teacher, so I can see the difference. I can see a difference between one kind. Oh no more. I'm sorry. I can see the difference when I receive the students from the teachers that do speak to them all the time in English and the teachers that don't, because they have like a real immersion in English, and it's always taught in like a context. So like my second graders are able to understand like basically almost everything, but they have been immersed since they were in nursery, and they're writing like short paragraphs. And but I do see that I think it depends a lot on the teachers that they have had through the years.
Teacher, your microphone is not being activated.
Thank you. Again, we go back to the idea that the time of exposing students to listening or speaking or writing is what is going to make the difference. So Belisario mentioned the idea that students that are in an immersion school learn faster because they are exposed to the second language more time. If we want students to improve their speaking and be more fluent, so we need to expose them to exercises that focus their attention on fluency. If we want them to speak not only fluently but also accurately, so we also need to expose them to grammar exercises and activities that help them to understand structure. So we need to make a balance on the time that we devote to the different skills and the purpose of each activity. If we just plan activities for students to fill the gaps and work on grammar, that's what they are going to learn. They are not going to speak. If we just plan exercises for them to be fluent and develop their speaking, disregarding accuracy, so that's what we are going to get. Students that can make themselves understood, but not in an accurate way, or probably their pronunciation is going to have some problems, because if we don't help them to focus on that, they will have problems with pronunciation if they learned in an age where it's going to be more difficult to make those connections of the sounds they perceive and the way they can produce them or how they can produce them. So we just need to be careful about the time that we devote to all the skills and the objective of the tasks that we take to the classroom. Somebody else has a comment about the reading or the topic that we are discussing?
I think that what you say, teacher, is very important, because if we focus and we give the kids time to do what they have to do, for example, if I give them time to think before they answer, it will be better for them. So that way they will correct their mistakes. What I normally do is I give them time also to correct the assignment that they have to do before they hand it up. They give it back to me. They hand it over. And what I normally do is with the Spanish teacher, we do something that is called correcciones de, I forgot the name right now. And they have to mark with a green pen the mistakes they have. We do it in Spanish and in English. Of course, it is hard for us as teachers to make them write or speak like perfect, but we are trying. And as I don't remember who was mentioning that, But as I think Wesley said about the school policies, talking every time in English, it is hard, yes, but it is important for you to make yourself clear and try to make the kids understand what you're saying, so that way you won't speak Spanish never.
Okay. Somebody else?
Well, I would like to say something about public schools. The level of English in those schools is zero. Like they focus on grammar and they never use the language. That's why they never learned English. They just study grammar and they have evaluations. The most important there is the grades, but they don't really learn English, and that's worrying. That's like, oh my god.
Yeah, that's true. Like that's what happens in most of public schools.
Does it happen in Bogota as well?
Yes, sure. I mean, all public schools in our country are teachers in those public schools need to face large classes, 40 students, 35 students with different needs, etc. So besides, there are teachers who have lost the ability to speak in English or are not very proficient. So then that's going to be a problem also when they teach. I need to also say that there are schools, public schools, that have some programs in which they get the help of foreigners for some hours. And those foreigners are in charge of providing students with that input of native sounds, of helping them to speak a little bit more. So that happens in some public schools, but not in most of them.
If I worked in those kind of schools, I would teach like first the basics, but in English, like how to introduce, how to talk about routines, like yeah, focus on this, on speaking, but even from the basic, I would say that it would be more interesting than learning grammar. Than sometimes they don't understand. Like you start this process, even from the basic.
Something that also happens in those public schools is that students misbehave, and the teacher needs to first work on how to manage the classroom. How to, for example, set habits for students and set a type of routine for the class. Once the teacher is able to get a student's attention and control 40 students, then the teacher can teach something. Otherwise, it will be like few students will pay attention and the others will misbehave, and that's going to be kind of difficult
Or impossible.
sometimes. Okay, somebody else wants to add a comment, um, an experience, a question?
Um, the, um,
Oh, no.
Hi.
Come on.
Okay.
Go on, like people in England say,
In,
go
in
on.
the reading application, in the neural processing from the second language, studying to grammatical construction, verb and generic, concluded that very similar and construction. So when we compare the areas of the activation of the grammar of the first language and second language, they show the difference between activate brain areas, shows as the frontal and temporal context of both First, the drill area includes socratic structures during the grammatical process.
Right. So when we work on grammar, also the same parts of the brain are as you mentioned, activated. So that's why there is interference or an
Yes.
Okay, somebody else?
What you were saying about did you mention interference? Interference?
Yes, there is some interference when learning a second language. Interference from the first language, from the mother tongue.
Ah, okay.
Okay, I would like to say something about Portuguese, like comparing Spanish and Portuguese. At the beginning, the most difficult for students is the pronunciation, like
Yes.
phonetic, because Portuguese is, or the most difficult in Portuguese is the pronunciation, because I say, yeah, it makes people need to make a lot of effort because it's totally different to Spanish. And another thing, there are a lot of interference in vocabulary because some words are so similar to Spanish, but sometimes some words are not used in Portuguese. For example, like maybe or perhaps, we say in Spanish de pronto. The only can be used tal vez in Portuguese. So many people like sometimes can, or they use the language that was created by Brazilians. That is, no, sorry, I'm thinking in English. Is Portuñol, Portuñol. So
Yeah.
Portuñol, and this is hard, yeah, because some people think they are expressing correctly, but they're talking Portuñol, and that was created by Brazilians because they were the ones who were interested in learning Spanish first. Now it's very common in Colombia, or is studied a lot because of the scholarships offered by the government of Brazil for masters and doctoral degrees are for free, are totally free in Brazil.
But are you saying that is Portuñol a real language, or is like when we say Spanglish?
Exactly, to say Spanglish.
Ah, okay.
Yes, it's like if you say Spanish. I used to work for a Spanish company, and we went to the Olympic Broadcasting Services, and we had a meeting in Rio de Janeiro, and I had to speak Portuñol because the person who hired me, he didn't know anything about the language. I know a few words. Of course, I'm not an expert, but I believe I do a good job. So sometimes when I didn't know how to pronounce the word, Brazilians, they were like, "Go ahead, speak Portuñol. Don't worry."
Say something in Portuguese.
Tudo bem, hermano? Deus abençoe.
That's Portuñol. That's Portuñol. Sure. because brother, you say irmão, irmão. Irmão. Another important thing is that students who don't study Portuguese here before going to Brazil, they don't learn Portuguese well. Like, and the students who study first here, like, they can improve their Portuguese. Yeah, there are some students who think, no, Portuguese is very easy, I don't need to study it, and they go there, but they don't learn Portuguese properly. They are not able to talk that language properly.
Because they didn't want to. If they wanted to learn it if they wanted to speak in an accurate way, they would devote some time to learning in a proper way. But if you know that they are going to understand if you speak Spanish or mix Spanish with Portuguese. So they say, well, I make myself understood, they can understand. So that's it.
And sometimes they have a good level of Portuguese, but they make many mistakes, grammar mistakes, because they never studied the language before.
Mm.
So the best results are by people who study first, have best results, and they can communicate in a better way, or they can use grammar betterly.
Well, any other comment, experience, question?
This is a very interesting topic when you actually go into it and start analyzing all the studies that have been done. And I think we try to agree with some of them and disagree with some of the authors. So I think the topic is really interesting for our career. And it's nice to share the experiences with everyone also.
It is important, yes. So some of you who want to teach in an immersion school, so it will be nice to read more about bilingualism. There is a book that is free for all students, and you can get the book at the databases of the university. So that's you go to the web page of the university. You click on library, and there you have some links that will take you to books that are free for students. So you can download some good books about bilingualism that are free for all of you. Just
Good to know. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, in case you are interested in reading more about that topic of bilingualism, there you will get some information.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great, but on holidays.
Yeah, well, this is our last encounter.
2 weeks.
Next week, I will publish the grades next week. So if you have any, I will publish them by Tuesday. By Tuesday. So if you have any comment about your grades, you can let me know. You can email me. Or if I made yes, probably I make a mistake when typing the grades. So you can email me next week.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all for your participation. Any other comment, question before we finish? Please don't forget to upload your self-evaluation. The link is in assessment. The assessment.
When is the deadline?
This Sunday, because I want to give you to publish your grades on Tuesday. So this Sunday I will check if all of you publish the self-evaluation. If not, I will email you. The idea is that grade is published, or that you publish the self-evaluation on Sunday.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks a lot, teacher, for everything.
Thank you, Jana.
Thank you, teacher.
To share your knowledge with us.
You are welcome. Well, any questions you might have, please email me. And have a good night. And let me know if you have any question, okay?
Okay, sure.
We will.
Okay.
Teacher?
Juanita, are you there? Please, I need your cell phone number because of the teacher practicum 1. So please type
Okay, teacher,
could you please
so Can I type it?
Yes, please.
Yeah, chat? Okay, so I'll type it. Just a second.
Okay. Fernando, do you have a question? No, he's not there. Okay.
Teacher, I have a question.
Alexander?
Yes, I was just wondering when you were going to upload all the grades that, like all the assignments that we have done.
Yes. Today I was uploading task 4 grades. Tomorrow we'll upload task 5. And by this weekend, you will have the rest of the grades with the feedback
Right, nice.
published in the weekend.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, teacher, thank you. Good night.
Okay, Jaime, have a nice night.
Have a good night, teacher.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Nice to see you all. Take care. All the best.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye, my friend.
Okay, so Juanita, as soon as I have information about the teacher practicum, because we will talk about that with Jorge tomorrow, so I will let you know. I will email you, or I will contact you through WhatsApp. Okay, so we can have a meeting before. Good. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye, teacher Diana. Have a good night.
Teacher? So I'll wait for you to contact me before I go to the school?
Yes, yes, because tomorrow we will talk about that practicum with Jorge. As soon as he tells me that everything is okay and there are no changes, and well, I can talk with the students, so I will contact you.
Oh, okay, thank you. Okay, I'll wait for you.
Good.
I'll wait for you to contact me. Thank you, teacher. Have a good
Okay.
night.
Thank you. Same to you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.